Hi everybody, it's Mr. Kearns. This is a recording for the remote learning packet for weeks 5 and 6 for Global 2, Math, Forensics, and ELA 10. All right, our emails are up here at the top if you need to get in touch with us, aside from the calls that we make to you guys every week. And please remember to put your name in the top here because some students are still emailing instead of uploading to Schoology. And when we download them, it makes it easier to organize if we can just look quickly and see your name up here. Right, the theme for this week, or these 2 weeks, is what the war was like during World War II and how it affected all those involved. The first course, as always, is Global Studies, and the objectives are to describe the characteristics of World War II warfare and explain the effects of those characteristics on those involved. So the first activity is a review of the precursors to World War II by examining the images below and answering the questions. Okay, so you have the definition of precursor here, which is a person or thing that comes before another of the same kind. A forerunner is a synonym. And you can watch this brief video here if you don't remember the precursors to World War II. And then jot your answers in here. Question 1, 2, 3. Okay, and you type it directly into the document. Don't forget to go up and save your document to your desktop. All right. Okay, something like that, and you save it to your desktop. All right, click save there. Okay, down here we have the Axis and the Allies. These were the two major sides during World War II. On the Allies side, you had the United States, Britain, France, and Russia after they left the Axis in 1941. Also, these smaller players here are the other countries that were involved on the Allied side. The Axis side was Germany, Italy, and Japan, with these smaller players down here as well. 60 to 85 million civilian and military deaths during World War II, and these were including lives lost to war-related disease and famine, as well as the Holocaust. All right, this shows, unfortunately, dead Soviet soldiers who were fighting in the wintertime against the Germans. Setting the stage. Like World War I, World War II was a total war. A total war is a military conflict in which nations mobilize all available resources in order to destroy another nation's ability to engage in the war. When one side of a conflict participates in a total war, they dedicate not only their military to victory, but the civilian population at home to working for victory as well. As a result, the country becomes very nationalistic. Feelings of pride are interwoven with sacrifice, and the nation's victory or loss becomes a part of the national identity. In World War II, technology played a major role. Following World War I, many countries learned that from their past mistakes and began to develop new technology during the interwar period of the 1920s and 30s. New technology improved the speed and impact of existing weapons and improved intelligence collection. The new technology determined the victors of World War II and played an important role in future conflicts. Okay, and you're going to answer the question, define what total war means and explain how this led to a rise in nationalism. We have the definitions down here to help guide you. B, what role did technology play in World War II? You're going to watch a video from minute 236 until the end, or you can Google search if you'd like to find the answer to question 8. Explain why intelligence gathering was of vital importance to both Allies and the Axis powers during World War II and what information they would be looking for. So, there was spying going on, there were codes being sent back and forth, and there was a constant game of trying to figure out what the other side was up to and to act first before the enemy did. So you're going to watch the video and answer this question. And just disclaimer, guys, for a question like this, we're looking for a small paragraph, so we'd like to see 5 sentences. Fully explain your answers, okay? Next, on page 4, we have the World War II reference timeline. In 1939, World War II starts in Europe. Hitler invades Poland, and on the 1st of September, Britain and France declare war on Germany. 1940, the German Blitzkrieg overwhelms Belgium, Holland, and France. British victory in the Battle of Britain forces Hitler to postpone invasion plans. In 1941, Hitler breaks the Nazi-Soviet pact and invades the USSR, which is Russia. He wants the country's raw materials and the end of communism in Europe. The USSR joins the Allies. Hitler's blitz continues against Britain's major cities. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and the US enters the war. In 1942, Germany suffers setbacks at Stalingrad due to harsh Soviet climate. That was the winter. Mass murder of Jewish people at Auschwitz begins, so the Holocaust begins, or at least at the camps. In 1943, surrender at Stalingrad marks Germany's first major defeat. Italy surrenders, but Germany takes over the battle. 1944, Soviet offensive gains momentum in Eastern Europe. D-Day, the Allied invasion of France. Paris is liberated from German control in August. 1945, Auschwitz liberated by Soviet troops. Russians reach Berlin. Hitler commits suicide and Germany surrenders on May 7th. After atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrenders on the 14th of August. In 1945, the World War II ends. August 15, 1945, Japan surrenders, and on September 2nd of 1945, the war is officially over. Okay? That would be the battle, or the war in the Pacific, as well as the war in Europe. Question 9. What event started World War II? Question 10. Why did the Soviets switch from the Axis to the Allies in 1941? Question 11. Why did the United States join the war in 1941? Question 12. When did the mass murder of Jewish people at Auschwitz begin? Question 13. Why was D-Day an important event in World War II history? 14. What event occurred before Germany's surrender in 1945? 15. Why did Japan surrender in August of 1945? 16. What event ended World War II? And type your answers directly in these boxes, all right, guys? Make sure you save your document often so you don't lose progress. Page 6, aircraft. Aircraft technology was important in World War II. After World War I, countries were drawn to the concept of mass aerial bombing because they wanted an alternative to trench warfare. Throughout the war, improvements were made to increase speed and altitude limits for aircraft. 17. Why did countries begin to invest in aircraft technology after World War I? Here you see a German aircraft here, the Luftwaffe, and here you see British aircraft flying. Page 7. Military vehicles, tanks. World War I created a demand for armored weapons which could navigate any kind of terrain, and this led to the development of the tank. By World War II, tank design advanced significantly. Due to the increased need for troop mobility in World War II, tanks became faster and were strapped with even more firepower. Follow this link here or here to watch the History Channel World War II tanks and respond to the questions below. Question 18. Why were tanks important on the battlefield? 19. Why did the United States increase its production of tanks after the German Blitzkrieg? Here you get an image of Soviet tanks coming along. Down here is a U.S. Sherman tank. And over here on the right, I believe these are tanks being manufactured in Germany. They might be Panzers, which were the most lethal tanks. Are they Panzers? Not the Panzers. They weren't the most lethal ones. The atomic bomb, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the United States Army Air Forces dropped the nuclear weapon, Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. The explosion immediately killed 80,000 people and leveled 90% of the city. Later, tens of thousands of people died of radiation exposure. 3 days later, the Fat Man bomb was detonated over Nagasaki. Fat Man killed over 40,000 people. Bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Visit www.history.com, topics World War II, bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and respond to the questions below. All right, so you're going to answer question 20 and 21 here. Why did the United States drop atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Use the video and the text to guide your answer. 21. What was the Manhattan Project? How did this project improve American military technology? All right. Over here you see the two mushroom clouds from the respective bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're going to watch the History Channel Atomic Bomb and answer question 22. What were the impacts of the atomic bomb? Page 10. Electronics and communication, the Enigma machine. Equipment designed for communication and the interception of communication became essential during World War II. The Allied and Axis nations relied on different forms of communication technology to send encrypted messages and break into their enemies' messages, breaking the code. I'm going to watch the video here and respond to the questions below. How did Nazi troops use encoded communication during World War II? How did Allied forces try to break these codes? I'm going to answer these questions here. The Battle of Midway. Watch the video and answer the questions below. So you click here to watch the video or on the play button to watch the video. 25. What was the reason for this large-scale naval battle? 26. Who had more supplies and weapons? 27. Who won and what were the costs of victory? And here in this image you can see the airplanes flying above the battleships and the destroyers, the entire fleets in the Pacific here during the Battle of Midway. Regents multiple choice check for understanding. Question 28. During World War II, the Allied invasion of France on D-Day, June 6, 1944, was significant because it demonstrated the power of the atomic bomb, resulted in the successful German revolt against Hitler and the Nazi Party, led to the immediate surrender of German-Italian forces, or forced Germans to fight a two-front war. You choose your answer using these buttons here. 29. Which headline is most closely associated with the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Japan signs Treaty of Kanagawa. Nuclear bombs dropped on Japan. Japan invades Korea. Japan hosts discussion on greenhouse gases. 30. Which geographic factor was most significant in helping the Soviet Union withstand German attacks in World War II? 1. The Ural Mountains served as a barrier to advance German armies. 2. Distance and harsh winters disrupted German supply lines. 3. Extensive food-producing areas kept the Soviet armies well fed. 4. Numerous ports along the Arctic Sea allowed for the refueling of the Soviet transport ships. Question 31. During World War II, which event occurred last? The German invasion of Poland, the Russian defense of Stalingrad, the United States bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or the Japanese invasion of Manchuria? Question 32. Which conflict is most closely associated with events in Nanjing, Dunkirk, and Hiroshima? 1. Russian Revolution. 2. Cultural Revolution. 3. World War II. Or 4. The Korean War. Formative assessment task. Here you see it says World War I. Location worldwide, but mostly in Europe. Dates 1914 to 1918. Deaths 20 million. World War II. Location worldwide. Dates 1939 through 1945. Deaths 60 million to 85 million. Directions. After examining all the documents and statistics above, complete the task below. Task. Using information from the documents and your knowledge of global history, write a response in which you identify 2 reasons why there were more deaths in World War II than in World War I, and you explain why/how these 2 reasons resulted in more deaths in World War II than in World War I. Okay? So everything preceding this page, pages 1 through 12, you can use that information, use your previous answers to help you get started on this. Mr. Iandiorio is going to expect to see 2 paragraphs, one for each of the reasons that you're detailing here. If you want to get very fancy, you can write 3 paragraphs, an introduction and then 2 body paragraphs. Okay? Page 14, World War II explained in 5 questions. Directions. Watch the video, World War II, World History Crash Course, and answer the following questions. Describe the military tactic known as the Blitzkrieg. How did it give the Nazis such an advantage in the first few months of World War II? 34. Identify and briefly describe why 1941 was a big year in World War II. 35. What happened at the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942, and why was this battle so important in World War II? Question 36. Describe how food played a major role in the decisions that led to the war in both Europe and Asia. Question 37. Why is World War II so important in world history? Briefly explain your answers. Page 15. What was the Holocaust? Objectives: to understand what the Holocaust was, where it took place, who was involved, and events transpired during. Directions: in the chart below, write what you think is true about the Holocaust in the left-hand column, what you would like to know and the Holocaust, or about the Holocaust in the middle column, and leave the final column blank for now. So question 40 stays blank for the moment. Page 16, vocabulary. Directions: read the vocabulary words below and answer the questions in the right-hand column. So you have atrocity, an extremely wicked, cruel act, typically one involving physical violence or injury. Genocide is a fairly new word. It was created by Raphael Lemkin, who believed that the atrocities of the Holocaust needed a new name to describe them, so he combined the prefix geno, meaning race or tribe, with the suffix side, which denotes killing. So he invented a new word. After the Holocaust, an organization called the United Nations defined the term in the following way. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, or racial or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. 41. Identify an event that you've studied in history that could be called an atrocity. Why does this event qualify as an atrocity? And remember, atrocity is an extremely wicked or cruel act, typically one involving physical violence or injury. Why was the word genocide created? Question 42. You find that information here. Page 17. Anti-Semitism, hostility to or prejudice against Jews. Here you see a poster which was propaganda and anti-Semitic by the Germans. Based on what you have already learned about Nazi Germany, give an example of an anti-Semitic action taken by the regime. So an action against the Jewish people. What was the Holocaust? Directions: after reading the text below and the rest of the article from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Introduction to the Holocaust, answer the questions in the table on page 18 below. So you have to read the article that's linked right here, guys. The Holocaust was a systematic, bureaucratic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jewish people by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. The Nazis who came to power in Germany in January of 1933 believed that Germans were racially superior and that Jews, deemed inferior, were an alien threat to the so-called German racial community. So after hearing this and reading the article, answer these questions. 44. Based on the article, what was the Holocaust? 45. How many Jewish people were killed during the Holocaust? 46. What other groups were targeted during the Holocaust? Why did the Germans target the Jewish people and these groups? 47. What methods did the Nazis use to separate Jewish people and other targeted groups from the rest of the population? 48. What methods did the Nazis use to carry out the extermination of Jewish people and other targeted groups? And 49. What ended the Holocaust? Okay. Page 19, what happened during the Holocaust? Objectives: to understand the events that led up to and took place during the Holocaust. You're going to watch the video here, linked here, and it's the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's video, The Path to Nazi Genocide. You're going to watch it only from minute 16 to the end. So fast forward to minute 16 and then watch the video through the end and answer the questions below. Number 50, what were the goals of the Nuremberg Laws? 51. According to Nazism, what was the driving force in history? 52. Based on the video, which groups were identified as racially inferior and unworthy of life by the Nazis? 53. How did life in Germany change for Jewish people after 1933? Question 54. Give 3 examples of actions taken by the Nazis from 1933 to 1939 that were anti-Semitic. 55. What was the goal of Nazi propaganda that targeted the Jews? 56. What was Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass? I know I didn't say that properly, but I don't speak German. What actions taken by the Nazis prevented Jewish people from leaving Germany? 58. After declaring war on Russia and invading Eastern Europe, the Germans segregated Jewish people into ghettos. In this context, what are ghettos? For 59, in the video, the narrator reads the following statement from Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the SS, a military group responsible for the surveillance and terror in German-occupied territory. This invasion is an ideological battle and a struggle of races. Here in this struggle stands National Socialism, Nazism, an ideology based on the value of our Germanic Nordic blood. On the other side stands a population of 180 million, a mixture of races whose very names are unpronounceable and whose physique is such that one can shoot them down without pity and compassion. Question 59. Based on this quote, what were the Nazis taught about other races? How do you think this affected the way they interacted with people that were different than them? That's your question here. Question 60. What was the job of the mobile killing squads in Eastern Europe? 61. Why were Jewish people in areas of Europe occupied by Germans resettled to Eastern Europe? 63. Describe what happened when Jewish people arrived at the concentration camps. 64. What was the purpose of the killing centers? 65. How did people outside of Germany react to reports from Allied forces who liberated these camps? Here you see the image of Jewish people behind barbed wire in one of the concentration camps from the BBC News. Page 22. Who was responsible for the Holocaust? Objective. To understand who was responsible for the Holocaust. Directions. Read the poem below, then answer the questions that follow. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Poem by Martin Niemöller, a prominent Protestant pastor who emerged as an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps. Question 66. Which historical event is referenced in the poem above? Why do you think this? So give an example, okay? Use line numbers. Say line number 5, line number 6, etc. 67. Who do you think they are in the poem above? Why do you think this? 68. According to the author, who is responsible for the historical event that is referenced? The Nuremberg Trials. Watch the excerpt from PBS Legacy of War, The Nuremberg Trials, and answer the questions below. I'm going to click this link to watch the video, and then you're also going to read this text before answering the questions. The Nuremberg Trials were a series of trials most notable for the prosecution of prominent members of the political, military, and economic leadership of Nazi Germany. The trials were held in the city of Nuremberg, Germany from 1945 to 1946 at the Nuremberg Palace of Justice. The first and best known of these trials was the trial of major war criminals before the International Military Tribunal, IMT, which tried 24 of the most important captured leaders of Nazi Germany. It was held from November 20th, 1945 to October 1st of 1946. The Nuremberg trials were an attempt to bring to justice those leaders of Nazi Germany who were not only responsible for World War II, but also the Holocaust, which was perpetrated against millions of people of Central and Eastern Europe. Some 200 German war crime defendants were tied to Nuremberg, and 1,600 others were tied under the traditional channels of military justice. Political authority for Germany had been transferred to the Allied Control Council, which, having sovereign power over Germany, could choose to punish violations of international law and the laws of war. Because the court was limited to violations of the laws of war, it did not have jurisdiction over crimes that took place before the outbreak of war on September 1st, 1939. Here you see a picture of the trials taking place. Representatives from four Allied countries, Great Britain, the United States of America, France, and Russia, served as prosecutors and judges. The indictments were for 1. Participating in common plan or conspiracy to accomplish for the accomplishment of a crime against peace. 2. Planning, initiating, and waging wars of aggression and other crimes against peace. 3. War crimes. And 4. Crimes against humanity. Death sentences were carried out on October 16, 1946, and the prisoners sentenced to incarceration were transferred to Spandau Prison in 1947. The Nuremberg trials initiated a movement for the establishment of a permanent international criminal court, eventually leading over 50 years later to the adoption of the Statute of the International Criminal Court. The conclusions of the Nuremberg trials served to help draft the Genocide Convention 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and the Convention on the Abolition of the Statute of Limitations on War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity in 1968, and the Geneva Convention on the Laws and Customs of War in 1949, its supplementary protocols in 1977. Source: Nuremberg Trials. Encyclopedia link is right here if you'd like to read more. The Nuremberg Trials, question 69. What was the purpose of the Nuremberg Trials? 70. What were the defendants on trial for? 71. What evidence was brought forth during the trial to support the indictments? And 72. What were the effects of the Nuremberg Trials? Regents multiple choice check for understanding. The Nuremberg laws are best described as efforts of the Roman Catholic Church to punish heresy, major articles in the Declaration of Rights of Man, specific laws contained in Justinian Code, or anti-Semitic laws of the 20th century Germany. 74. Which important principle was established as a result of the Nuremberg trials? Defeated nations have no rights in international courts of law. Individuals can be held accountable for crimes against humanity. Soldiers must follow the orders of their superiors. Aggressor nations must pay war reparations for damages caused during wars. 75. Which situation was a direct result of the Holocaust and other atrocities committed by the Nazis during World War II? Development of the Cold War, war crime trials in Nuremberg, formation of the League of Nations, or separation of Germany into Eastern and Western zones. 76. A major result of the Nuremberg trials after World War II was that Germany was divided into 4 zones of occupation. The United Nations was formed to prevent future acts of genocide. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was established to stop the spread of communism. Nazi political and military leaders were held accountable for their actions. 77. Which action illustrates the concept of genocide? The British negotiating peace with Adolf Hitler during 1938 Munich Conference. Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin signing a non-aggression pact in 1939. The Nazi armies eliminating the Jews and other groups part of Adolf Hitler's final solution. German generals plotting against Adolf Hitler. 78. Which is a major reason the Holocaust is considered a unique event in modern European history? 1. The Jews of Europe have seldom been victims of persecution. 2. Civilians rarely were killed during air raids in Great Britain. 3. Adolf Hitler concealed his anti-Jewish feelings until after he came to power. Or 4. The genocide was planned in great detail and required the cooperation of many people. Base your answers to questions 7 and 8 on the passage below and your knowledge of social studies. The important lesson wasn't so much that Nazis' extraordinary evil, but that it could happen with the participation of so many, the indifference of many more. That humanity has no guarantees against its vicious streaks except its own conscience, for which each individual is possible. The effort for decency and justice must go on every day, everywhere. Flora Lewis, New York Times, 1987. Question 79. What is the main idea of that passage? A nation's wartime policy should be subjected to moral standards. Individuals who follow the orders of their superiors should not be prosecuted for their actions. 3. In the time of war, the end justifies the means. Or 4. Individuals have an obligation to oppose immoral policies. In the passage, the term extraordinary evil refers to Berlin blockade, Cold War era, Marshall Plan, or Holocaust. Course Math, page 26. Objectives: to understand how ciphers and codes were utilized in World War II and how math was used to break the Enigma code. You're going to watch the YouTube video about the Enigma machine. after reading the text and answer the questions below. Watch the video clicking this or this. Ciphers, codes, and code breaking were important aspects of World War II. One of the most famous, encryption, the process of converting information into a secret code to hide its true meaning, devices was called the Enigma machine. This machine was used extensively by all branches of the Nazi Germany military to send messages to one another. The Allied forces often intercepted these messages but were unable to crack the code until an English mathematician developed a way. Watch the following videos and answer the questions that follow. Note the answers to the questions are sequential. The first answer is at the beginning of the video, the last question at the end. If you hit the space bar when you hear the answer to the question, it will pause so you can record your answer and then continue to the video again afterward. Question 1. What was the Enigma machine used for? Question 2. Where was the Enigma machine seen in the video found? Who was it found by? 3. Why did the Germans think that they had an unbreakable code? 4. When does the second rotor in the machine begin to rotate? 5. How would they transmit the code from the Enigma machine? 6. What needed to be done to decode the message? 7. How many starting places does each rotator have? Why is this the number? 8. How many rotors were there and how many were chosen each time the Enigma machine was set up? 9. How many different ways can the 3 rotors be placed in this machine? How do we find this number? 10. How many different rotor positions are possible? How did we find this number? 11. How many combinations did the plug board have? 12. What were the total number of ways to set up the Enigma machine? 13. How would troops know what setting should be used to decode the message? Page 30. Flaws in the Enigma machine. Watch the video on flaws in the Enigma machine using this play button or right here and answer the questions below. 14. What happens when the same letter in a code is pressed multiple times? 15. What was the flaw with the Enigma machine? 16. What did the Germans send every day at 6 a.m.? 17. How did this help the Allies to break the code? 18. What was the name of the mathematician who helped to break the Enigma machine codes? 19. What phrases did they look for? 20. What was the name of the machine he built, the mathematician that broke the code? 21. How long did it take this machine to crack the code? 22. Why was the time that it took to crack the code important? 23. What part of the Enigma machine did the bomb machine target? 24. What is it called in mathematics when you arrive at 2 solutions, but it can't be both? 25. What did the bomb machine use to speed up code breaking process? 26. Which German military branch did not use the same codes? 27. What was the British code machine called and what made it more effective than the Enigma machine? Now we're going to get into some cryptography of our own, everybody, okay? And the first one is going to be called the @bash cipher. The @bash cipher is a very old substitution cipher when one letter is substituted for another. That was originally developed for the use with Hebrew alphabet. In fact, in the book of Jeremiah, there are several words that have been enciphered using the @bash cipher. It is generally considered one of the easiest ciphers to use as it follows a very simple substitution method. The first letter of the alphabet is replaced with the last letter, and the second letter is replaced with the second from last, and so on. Fill in the table using the @bash cipher. So you are going to use these as a reference. So A, Z, B, Y. And then you notice over here Z has A, Y has B. Use the text I just read to help you complete the cipher table. Okay, so you're going to type in, I'm not saying that U is the next one, but you're going to type in the letters in the correct spots to finish out the cipher. And once you do that, go to question 28. The following have been encoded using the @bash cipher. What are the words? So once you finish the table, you're going to decipher these words and type them out. All right, same for B. And then in 29, using the @bash cipher, write your own name. 30. Would this be an easy code to break? Explain your answer. Make sure the word because is in your answer. Otherwise, you did not explain it well enough. Page 34, cryptography worksheet, the Caesar shift. Julius Caesar used a simple substitution cipher to send messages to his troops. He used a very simple rule to replace each letter and another letter from the alphabet. With another letter from the alphabet. He substituted each letter by the letter that was 3 places further along in the alphabet, so that A was replaced with D, B with E, and so on. Question 31. How easy is it for someone who intercepts a secret message written using this cipher to work out the original message? So do you think it would be easy to decipher a message that you found with this that was encoded in this cipher, the Caesar shift? And 32. Is there any way to make it harder to work out? So do you think you could make this cipher more difficult? You're going to fill in your answers here, completing the table. Remember, it says that it was 3 places further along in the alphabet. So B is E, A is D, and on and on and on. Okay? The Caesar shift continued. Create your own Caesar shift. Fill in the table below and encrypt your name. So Caesar simply went ahead 3 places further along in the alphabet. You have to make your own by going ahead or behind a certain number of places. You can change the number of places in your shift and change the directions. Get creative with it, okay? So fill in the table with your own Caesar shift, and then you're going to write out your name. So mine, Kearns. And then my encoded name might look something like this based on my own Caesar shift cipher. Okay? That's number 33. This is just an example of what it might look like. Another way to visualize how the shift works. A goes to D because it's 3 ahead. B goes to E because it's 3 ahead. C goes to F because it's 3 ahead, and so on and so forth. Cryptography worksheet, the pig pen cipher. The pig pen cipher is a substitution cipher that was used by the Freemasons in the 18th century. They substituted each letter of the alphabet with a picture. So here you see 4 different tables, all right? And the entire alphabet is distributed amongst them. So A is in the top left box. Looks like a tic-tac-toe box, right? A is in the top left. D is in the middle left, and G is in the bottom left. B, top middle, E, middle, and H, bottom middle. C, top right, F, middle right, and I, bottom right. So you would show where these are using symbols like the ones you see down here, or the example over on the right. Do you see right here where it looks like an L? That's the top left box. So that would represent A. So if you wanted to use the symbol to represent A, it would be the one that looks like the box that corresponds with it. So this would be B. It would look like a U around the B here. That's what you would type in, and so on. For J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, and R, you would do the same thing with the symbol, but it would have a dot in it, okay? S, T, U, and V, you would see these sort of arrow-looking symbols, like the one right here, the one down here, or more appropriately right there. And then, once again, for W, X, Y, and Z, you have the dots. So you're going to use the diagrams to the left to write your name using the pig pen cipher. So let's see if we can do it together here. We're looking for me, we're looking for K, right? We're looking for E, we're looking for A, we're looking for R, N, and S. That's my name using the pig pen cipher right there. It corresponds perfectly. All right. Down here, Mr. Colvin wants you to create your own key, a set of grids like that above, and encode a short message using your own cipher. So you're going to type in the letters in different places here, okay? I don't know what I just did. Let's see if I can undo that. I can't. Get rid of that. Looks like we might have to fix that because it's going into all the boxes. But when it is fixed and you're doing this, you'll see you're going to put maybe S, U, wherever you want inside of these, okay? And then you're going to create your own cipher message like the one above. All right. Can't get rid of the H. Oh well. It gets to stay. Okay. Down here, You see X marks the spot. This is what it looks like as it's been encoded. You're going to make your own key, that was the one above, and then encode a short message down here using the cipher. All right, you'll type out your cipher, and Mr. Colvin will decipher it. Make sure to keep your message appropriate, everybody. Page 38, cryptography worksheet, the affine cipher. The affine cipher is a cipher that uses math to encode the message. It works by converting every letter in the alphabet into a number, performing a function on that number, add, subtract, multiply, divide, etc., and turning the result back into a letter. When converting letters into numbers using this system, we use the following. So here's a table that just has the numbered 0 through 25. For my code, I'm going to multiply 3 and add 5. The equation to find each new numerical value would be y equals 3x plus 5. That would yield the following. So you have the table right here that corresponds to that equation. So B would be 8 times 3 plus 5. Okay? And that would be B would be 1 times 3 plus 5. So it's 3 plus 5 equals 8. That's why it's 8 down here. Over here, it gets a little bit more wily because it's 22 times 3, which is 66, plus 5, which turns out to be 71. All right? So down here, it says to convert back to letters, we would use the two tables and convert back based on the original. Since A now has the value of 5, when encrypted, it would be an F. Since B now has a value of 8, when encrypted, it would be an I. When we get to H, it has a value of 26, but our original table only goes up to 25. To figure out what letter H would be encrypted as, we must divide by 26, since there are 26 letters in the alphabet, and find the remainder. The remainder, when divided by 26, will be the equivalent to letter from the original table. Since 26 divided by 26 is 1, the remainder here is 0, hence H would be encrypted as A. I know that sounds confusing. So you get your resulting answer, right? You get your resulting answer, and we divide by the number. So if your resulting answer comes out to, I don't know, let's see, 30, for example. You divide 30 by 26, and the remainder would be 4. So then you find the corresponding 4, and we would encrypt that number with E instead of, that letter with E, okay? If you have questions, and I'm sure a lot of you will, email Mr. Colvin and he will clarify this green part for you, okay? But just remember, you use the original table, you plug in this equation, y equals 3x plus 5, x being the number from the table here, so m, that would be 12, so 3 times 12 is 36, plus 5 equals 41, right? So y equals 41. And then we find the corresponding one. Oh, that's m down here. So m equals 41. All right. Now Mr. Colvin is going to have you use the affine cipher yourself. So the original table is still fine up here. Second table is right here. And is what is the remainder if we calculate for f? So we're still using the equation from above, which is y equals 3x plus 5. So if we do f, we're going to have the number 5. So it would be f equals, right, 3 times 5 plus 5. So you're going to calculate this out and put your answer here where I just typed it, okay? Then you're going to have to find the remainder. So you have to divide that number by 26 and find the remainder, and that is what we will calculate for f. Try that on your own, guys. It gives us this table here now. After we do that, we get this table. All right. Colvin would use numbers 11, 21, 12, 16, 3, and 18 to reference the original table, and that would be encrypted as LVMQDS. Using the charts above, what would your name be encrypted as? So what would your name be encrypted as? Ms. Colvin gave you the example of his name here. Page 40. You are now going to use the affine cipher and write an equation to calculate the corresponding numerical value for each letter. So you write the original here, which for C would be 2, right? And then you're going to do the equation. So 2 times 5 equals what? Is it times 5 or times 3? Make sure we had it typed in here accurately. It is times 3. So I have to fix that too. Oh no, I'm sorry. Page 40, it says multiply by 5 and then add 7, given the chart above. I'm sorry about that. So you multiply 2 times 5, which would equal 10, and then you do 10 plus 7 equals 17. All right, there's your final answer. Okay, so you're going to do that for each one of the letters of the alphabet, and then you're going to, for 39, you're going to fill all of those in down here. This needs to be completely filled in based on this column, the answers I mean in this column here. All right, and then for 40, you're going to divide by 26 and find the remainder. Fill in these values in the chart below. So if it is above the certain number, you have to find 26. So it's going to be above 25. You divide by 26 and find the remainder. Okay? After that, using the chart above, encrypt Fox Meadow High School and write it below. So we need to see your encrypted version of Fox Meadow High School below here for page 41. Cryptography worksheet, the affine cipher. Continued, create your own using a new equation other than multiply by 5 and add 7. And answer the following questions. So you're going to create your own. Maybe I would do 8, or maybe I would do x times 9 divided by 8, or what have you. I probably wouldn't get so fancy though. Maybe I'll use subtraction instead and do minus 5. All right, whichever one you want to do, just remember the longer and crazier you make it, the more difficult the calculations will be, but I'm sure Mr. Colvin will be impressed if you put in that kind of effort. Fill in the chart below, right here, with your answers, and then divide by 26 and find the remainder, and fill in for 44. 45, using the charts above, encrypt Fox Meadow High School and write it again below. Page 43, forensics. Objective to understand how the science of examining physical evidence, forensics, was used in times of war. Definitions. A forensic anthropologist analyzes skeletal remains to determine the identity of a victim, as well as his or her life history, cause of death, or other clues about a crime. An odontologist studies the structure and disease of teeth. So the title of this article is Hitler's Teeth Dispel Myths of Nazi Leaders' Survival. The tale of the Führer's teeth is a story not only of the top Nazis' demise, but of Cold War propaganda and cruelty. Note the line numbers here for your answers, okay, guys? French pathologists recently inspected a set of teeth kept in Moscow, recovered in Berlin in May of 1945. The first time Russian authorities allowed anyone to examine the remains in over 70 years. Lead forensic pathologist Philippe Charlier concluded they are authentic. The research team was also allowed to look at fragments of Hitler's skull to confirm the means by which he committed suicide. The teeth matched the descriptions provided by Hitler's dentist and revealed no trace of meat, consistent with the fact that the Führer was a vegetarian. Tooth decay and gum disease were probably the reasons for the Führer's notoriously bad breath. Bluish stains on some of the false teeth indicate that he may have taken cyanide to end his life. Researchers did not find any gunpowder residue on the jaw, which suggests that if Hitler did shoot himself, it was done through the forehead or neck, not the mouth. The new findings should, but probably won't, put an end to the notions that the Nazi leader somehow escaped the destruction of the final days of World War II. We can stop all the conspiracy theories about Hitler, Charlier said. He did not flee to Argentina in a submarine. He is not in a hidden base in the Antarctic or on the dark side of the moon. Instead, Hitler's story ended in the way every respectable historian believes it did, with a joint suicide in the Führer bunker in the ruins of Berlin, identifying Hitler's body. By April of 30th of 1945, Soviet troops had advanced to within 500 meters, 1,650 feet, of Hitler's underground command center in the heart of Berlin. Surrounded and barely able to communicate with the ragtag remnants of the Wehrmacht, Hitler realized that his dreams of a thousand-year empire or Reich were over. In the early afternoon, Hitler withdrew to his private quarters with his long-term mistress and wife of less than 2 days, Eva Braun. There they ingested cyanide capsules and shot themselves. Their bodies, together with those of the supposed animal lover, Hitler's 2 dogs, were discovered at 3:15 p.m. Mindful that Italians had defiled the corpse of Benito Mussolini and his mistress 2 days earlier, Hitler had left instructions for how his and Braun's bodies were to be disposed of. They were taken outside the bunker, covered with fuel, and burnt. It wouldn't be until May 5th that the Soviet forces discovered a charred body in a bomb crater and identified it as Hitler's. The Soviets compared the corpse's teeth, which contained conspicuous and unusual prostheses and bridge work, with descriptions provided by the dental assistant Kathy Hauserman. Later, Hitler's personal dentist, Hugo Blasch, would confirm the information to the Allies. His teeth were in bad shape, in such bad shape that his dentist was with him in the bunker. Lyubov, only his skull was taken, while other remains were thrown in the river. Hauserman's Russian interpreter, ElA Kaya, was entrusted with the set of Hitler's teeth because, by her account, it was feared that male members of the Red Army would get drunk and misplace them. She brought the remains to Moscow, but although the Soviets knew for sure that Hitler was dead, Stalin ordered the news suppressed so as to sow uncertainty and allow him to spread rumors that the Western Allies had secretly helped Hitler escape. It was a deceitful charade, a weird attempt to disguise the fact that his body had been found, Kaya wrote in her memoirs, which appeared in Russian in 1965 but were only published in English this March. Hitler was no longer an emblem of the war. The Russians called the disinformation campaign Operation Myth. Stalin's strategy, quite evidently, was to associate the West with Nazism by pretending that the British or Americans must be hiding him. The historian Anthony Beevor wrote in his book Berlin, The Downfall, 1945. When combined with the real fact that prominent Nazis such as Adolf Eichmann and Josef Mengele had in fact fled to South America, Stalin's deception was the genesis of conspiracy theories that Hitler had somehow survived World War II. The sad story of Hauserman. Though the fiction was absurd, the reality was tragic. Kaya, who later became an author, would have to wait until well after Stalin's death to tell her story. And Hauserman would suffer a far worse fate. As part of Stalin's campaign to suppress the truth, she was taken to the Soviet Union and sentenced to 10 years in a gulag, 6 of them in solitary confinement for assisting with Hitler's bridge work. They told her that, by helping to fix Hitler's teeth, she contributed to the continuation of the war, and that she should have hit him on the head with a bottle. Some told the Times of Israel. Ironically, Kaya said that Hauserman was not a committed Nazi, having hit a Jewish dentist and a former employer in her home during the Third Reich. Directions. Using the context of the reading, please answer the questions below. 1. What pieces of evidence prove Adolf Hitler died in 1945? 2. How did the forensic pathologists know Hitler was a vegetarian? 3. What was the approximate measurement of the remaining denture in centimeters? 4. What did the research team determine as the cause of death? 5. Why did Hitler instruct his men to destroy the corpses? 6. How were the bodies destroyed? How many bodies were there? 7. Why did Stalin order the death of Hitler to be kept secret? What was this campaign called? 8. What feature of Hitler's skull may prove it was from a male, not a female? There's a link here to a video that will help you with that if you have trouble. 9. Why was Kathy Hauserman sent to the Gulag for 10 years? Page 47. War crimes in concentration camps. 10-year-old Eva Moses had been stuffed into a train car on a seemingly endless journey from Hungary. Now she and her twin sister Miriam pressed close as Nazi guards shouted orders in German. Suddenly an SS guard stopped in front of the identical girls. Are they twins? He asked their mother. Is that good? She replied. He nodded, and Eva Moses' life changed forever. The SS guard grabbed her and Miriam, whisking them away from their mother as they screamed and never saw her again. EvA and Miriam had just become subjects of a massive inhuman medical experimentation program at Auschwitz-Birkenau, a program aimed solely at thousands of twins, many of them children. Led by physician Joseph Mengele, the program turned twins like EvA and Miriam into unwilling medical subjects in experiments that exposed about 3,000 children at Auschwitz-Birkenau to disease, disfigurement, and torture under the guise of medical research into illness, human endurance, and more. Twins were separated from other prisoners during the massive selections that took place at the camp's massive train platform and whisked off to a laboratory to be examined. All of their belongings were taken as they were led to the lab. Mengele usually used one twin as a control and subject, and the other to everything from blood transfusions to forced insemination, injections and disease, amputations and murder. Those that died were dissected and studied. Their surviving twins were killed and subjected to the same scrutiny. Twin studies had helped scientists like Mengele mentor justify what they saw as necessary discrimination against people with undesirable genetic characteristics: Jews, Roma people, LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, and others. But the twin experiments that had helped create the eugenics movement would ironically lead to the downfall of eugenics itself. For eugenicists like Mengele, identical twins like the Moses sisters were the perfect research subjects. Since they share a genome, scientists reasoned any physical or behavioral differences in twins would be due to behavior, not genetics. Eugenicists held genetics responsible for undesirable characteristics and social conditions like criminality and poverty. They believed that selective breeding could be used to encourage socially acceptable behavior and wipe out undesirable tendencies. Mengele wanted to continue the twin experiments he had begun with von Verschuer, and now he had a captive populace on which to do so. Though his earlier experiments had been legitimate, his work in Auschwitz-Birkenau was not. Abandoning medical ethics and research protocols, Mengele began conducting horrific experiments on up to 1,500 sets of twins, many of them children. The Mengele twins received nominal protection from some of the ravages of life at Auschwitz-Birkenau. They were not selected for the gas chambers, lived in separate quarters, and were given additional food and medical care. In exchange, though, they became unwilling subjects of the inhuman experiments at the hands of Mengele, who gained a reputation as the angel of death for his power, his mercurial temper, and his cruelty. For EvA, life as a Mengele twin meant sitting naked for hours and having her body repeatedly measured and compared to Miriam's. She withstood injections of an unknown substance that caused severe reactions. As twins, I knew that they were unique because we never permitted to interact with anybody in other parts of the camp, she later recalled, but I didn't know I was being used in genetic experiments. The Nazis' defeat ended Mengele's experimentation on twins at Auschwitz. At the end of the war, the Angel of Death managed to escape prosecution. Shielded by Nazi sympathizers, he lived in South America until his death in Brazil in 1979. In the aftermath of the war, scientists grappled with the aftermath of Nazi experimentation and the Holocaust use of eugenic principles in the name of genocide. In 1946, a group of German physicians who had carried out euthanasia and conducted medical experimentation in Nazi death camps were tried at Nuremberg during a 140-day-long trial. The trial resulted in 7 death sentences in the Nuremberg Code, a set of research ethics that has influenced modern concepts of informed consent and medical experimentation. Before we go on to page 49, everybody, I want you to go back up to global studies, where we had this triple section here, where you are going to write down what you now learned about the Holocaust. I'm going to tell you the page number when I get to it. Take a minute. Right here, is that it? Nope. Make our way there. Here we go. 40. Question 40 on page 15. You should now be able to answer that fully, okay? So we want you to do that. Answer that question fully based on everything you've learned up to this point. I wanted to make sure I read the forensics portion because I knew that it was going to touch on the events of the Holocaust and Joseph Mengele's cruel treatment of twins. All right, so now we get to question 10 for forensics. List 3 war crimes from this article and write a paragraph on why the German doctors and soldiers were convicted. So you list your war crimes here, and then the paragraph goes here. 11. Define eugenicist in your own words and explain how it relates to criminology and the Nazis' viewpoint. That's it for page 49 and forensics. And now we move on to English language arts. Objectives: to understand the hardships of soldiers from the Allies in the East, Russia, and the West, the USA and UK. Directions: read the nonfiction article regarding the battlefield of World War II and answer the questions that follow. On the battlefield. Tanks, artillery, ships, and trucks churned out by the United States at the beginning of World War II would be useful only if enough brave men could be found to take them into harm's way. In this respect, the United States proved to be exceptionally fruitful. After the Japanese attack on the American naval base, Pearl Harbor, recruitment centers across the nation were swamped with volunteers who were anxious to take a swing at the Japanese. Even so, by 1943, Washington had resorted to a draft of all able-bodied males between 18 and 40. The Marine Corps expanded from 1 division to 5, while the Navy put more than 1,000 ships to sea. The Army was the largest of all the services, and its basic training facilities became small cities in their own right. By 1945, about 16 million Americans had served in uniform, not including the mariners of the Merchant Marine. The Merchant Marine is the fleet of ships that delivers troops and equipment during wartime. The Allied powers, the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, continued their fight against the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the war continued. As millions of people joined the armed forces, separation and longing became common feelings. The songs of the time, like "Till We Meet Again" and "I'll Be Seeing You in all the old familiar places, reflected the feelings of loneliness that were felt in every town and by almost every family. Eventually, most soldiers and Marines were shipped overseas. They got their last view of America from the ports of embarkation: New York on the East Coast and San Francisco on the West. But before leaving, they typically spent a week or 10 days at a final staging area where they received required vaccines and made out their last wills and testaments. American troops on the way. That last period in the United States often offered the opportunity for a few days of liberty. There was no chance for a trip home. Trains were jammed and overloaded. But the port of embarkation, especially Manhattan, was another story. There, among the bright lights, nightclubs, and restaurants of the largest city in the world, they drank and laughed and at least pretended to be confident and happy. The next step was to board a troop ship. Quarters were tight, pleasures were few, and dangers were constant, especially in the Atlantic Ocean, where German submarines called U-boats lurked beneath the surface. The most common way to get to Europe was in a group of about 50 or 60 similar ships. Mercifully, the Allied navies gained a superiority over the Nazi submarines before most American soldiers crossed the ocean. Only 8,000 men were lost out of 4 million who made the journey aboard the defenseless cargo vessels. Allied forces gained ground against Germany and Japan. By late 1942, the tide had turned against the Axis powers. In June, the U.S. Navy won its greatest victory ever in the Battle of Midway. You guys learned about that earlier, in which an outnumbered American force inflicted devastating losses on the then superior Japanese fleet. By September, American Marines were beginning an island-hopping campaign that required them to fight their way across the Pacific. The good news, however, was that after the Battle of Midway, the Japanese were no longer able to undertake offensive operations. It was just a matter of time before the Japanese were crushed by American air and naval superiority. The German army was another matter. Generally regarded as the finest fighting force in the war, it had superbly trained and battle-hardened soldiers, sophisticated weapons, and brilliant tactical leaders. Only an enormous sacrifice by many nations could bring it down, but it happened. In the fall of 1942, the British Eighth Army counterattacked German forces in Africa and sent them scurrying home to Germany. Meanwhile, the Americans who had landed in Morocco and Algeria trapped thousands of Nazi soldiers who could not escape across the Mediterranean Sea. In 1943, a combined Anglo-American force invaded Sicily and then Italy, ultimately knocking Italy out of the war, and in perhaps the most devastating battle of all time at Stalingrad, between August 1942 and February 1943, the proud German Sixth Army, which had devastated France, was systematically annihilated by Russia's vengeful Red Army. Thereafter, Hitler's troops were rarely able to attack. Instead, they were destroyed by enormous forces coordinated by the Big Three: Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. Page 53. Allies prepare for invasion of Normandy. By the late 1942, the tide had turned against the Axis powers. In June, the U.S. Navy won its greatest victory ever in the Battle of Midway, in which an outnumbered American force inflicted devastating losses on the then superior Japanese fleet. By September, American Marines were beginning an island-hopping campaign that required them to fight their way across the Pacific. The good news, however, that after the Battle of Midway, the Japanese were no longer able to undertake offensive operations. It was just a matter of time before the Japanese were crushed. All right, this part we read already. So actually, you guys can ignore this. I don't know why this section doesn't have the right text, but I'll look into that. Directions. Complete the following multiple choice questions based on the reading. 1. Which idea is best supported by the following selection from the article? The tanks, artillery ships, and trucks churned out by the United States at the beginning of World War II would be useful only if enough brave men could be found to take them into harm's way. In this respect, the United States proved to be exceptionally fruitful. After the Japanese attack on American naval base Pearl Harbor, recruitment centers across the nation were swamped with volunteers who were anxious to take a swing at the Japanese. Even so, by 1943, Washington had resorted to a draft of all able-bodied males between 18 and 40. A. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was the only reason the United States decided to join the fight in World War II. The United States was able to volunteer more troops to fight in World War II than any other country in the world. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor because they were angry that the United States was sending supplies to other countries. The United States was aided by both military and required efforts by the citizens to meet the demands of fighting in World War II. Question 2. Which of the following selections from the article best supports the idea that the troops being sent overseas knew they were likely to be killed in the fighting? A. The songs of the lifetime, like Till We Meet Again and I'll Be Seeing You in All the Familiar Places, reflected the feelings of loneliness that were felt in every town and almost every family. B. But before leaving, they typically spent a week or 10 days at the final staging area where they received required vaccines and made out their last wills and testaments. C. There among the bright lights, nightclubs, and restaurants of the largest city in the world, they drank and laughed and at least pretended to be confident and happy. D. Only 8,000 men were lost out of 4 million who made the journey aboard the defenseless cargo vessel. Question 3. Which of the following statements best represents the Allied forces' approach to defeating Germany? A. The Allied forces trained their soldiers to fight together in the same place to bring down Nazi troops in one country at a time. B. The Allied forces spread their troops across multiple continents and countries in order to eliminate the Nazis' ability to attack. C. The Allied forces concentrated on defeating Nazi forces only in Africa, so they would be forced to surrender elsewhere. The Allied forces moved most of their operations to the Pacific in order to distract Germany in the Battle of Midway. 4. How does the article develop the idea that the invasion of Normandy would be one of the most decisive events of the war? A. By detailing the plans of Marshall and Eisenhower made by overcoming German artillery and beach hazards. B. By explaining that the Allied forces had already done most of the work needed to defeat the Axis powers. C. By outlining events that led up to the invasion and explaining serious dangers posed by the mission. D. By illustrating the feelings of the soldiers who learned that they would be part of the mission to take Europe. 5. Cause and effect. What was the main idea described in the article? What were the causes of this event? Describe each cause by citing specific details from the article and explain how it contributed to the main event. Be sure to use line numbers. The main event is highlighted in blue, so I'm not going to go up and read it to you. Some supporting causes are highlighted in purple, yellow, red, and gray. I need you to write out your answer here citing line numbers. If you do not cite line numbers, you are going to get partial credit, and it's not going to be good because this is one of the larger point answers. I would like to see multiple paragraphs, okay? Make sure you capitalize words at the beginning of sentences. Use appropriate punctuation. Your grade goes down quite a bit if your writing mechanics are sloppy, so put effort into your writing, all right? 6. How did Americans deal with the separation from family and friends during World War II? What military strategies helped the Allies gain the upper hand? So what you're going to do here, change the simple sentences in your response into complex sentences by adding the appropriate coordinating conjunctions and create a unique sentence of your own, creating complex sentences with fanboys word and a comma. All right, so I see here the bottom, I'm going to have to fix this too. There's going to be a window here where you write your own unique sentence. But up here, you're going to choose one of these words, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. You're going to put it in where it's appropriate and note how it changes the sentence, okay? So you can't just plug in any word. You have to choose one of the correct ones. There's usually 2 or 3. And then you're going to put in your answer here. They sang songs such as, type out your answer there, okay? For the quote. And then you're going to put your unique sentence right here. There will be a window when you guys are looking at this. All right, next part, the Battle of Stalingrad. Directions. Read the nonfiction article regarding the Battle of Stalingrad and answer the questions that follow. The Battle of Stalingrad was a brutal military campaign between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and its Axis allies during World War II. The battle was one of the largest, longest, and bloodiest engagements in modern warfare. From August 14, 1942 through February 1943, more than 2 million troops fought in close quarters. Nearly 2 million people were killed or injured in the fighting, including tens of thousands of Soviet civilians. But the Battle of Stalingrad ultimately turned the tide of World War II in favor of the Allied forces. Prelude to battle. In the summer of 1942, Germany's it's called Wehrmacht, it means war machine, army decided to attack southern Russia. It already had captured territory in much of present-day Ukraine and Belarus. Soviet forces had successfully rebuffed a German attack on western part of the country during the winter of 1941 and 42. However, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's Red Army had suffered significant losses of manpower and weaponry in the fighting. Stalin and his generals fully expected another Nazi attack to be aimed at Moscow. However, German dictator Adolf Hitler and the Wehrmacht had other ideas. They set their sights on Stalingrad, an important industrial center in Russia. The city produced, among other important goods, artillery for the Soviet army. Also, the Volga River runs through the city, the important shipping route connecting the western part of the Soviet Union with its distant eastern regions. Ultimately, Hitler wanted the Wehrmacht to occupy Stalingrad because of its value for propaganda purposes, given that it bore Stalin's name. For similar reasons, the Soviet Union felt a special need to protect it. Bitter battle begins. At first, the Soviet forces slowed the Wehrmacht's advances during a series of brutal skirmishes just north of Stalingrad. Stalin's forces lost more than 200,000 men, but they successfully held off German soldiers for a time. Firmly understanding Hitler's plans, the Soviet Union had already shipped much of the stores of grain and cattle out of Stalingrad. However, the city's 400,000 residents were not evacuated. The Soviet leadership believed their presence would inspire troops. Within a few days of launching its attack, Germany's Luftwaffe Air Force had made the Volga River impassable to shipping and sunk several commercial vessels. From late August through the end of the assault, the Luftwaffe conducted dozens of airstrikes on the city. The number of civilian casualties is unknown. However, it is believed that tens of thousands were killed and tens of thousands more were captured and forced into slave labor in camps in Germany. By September, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Stalingrad, and the Russians were getting desperate. Workers who were not involved in a war-related weapons production were told to fight, often without firearms. Women were enlisted to dig trenches at the front lines. The Red Army continued to suffer heavy losses. By the fall of 1942, Stalingrad was in ruins. Hitler proclaimed that upon taking Stalingrad, all of the city's male residents would be killed and its women deported. Stalin ordered all Russians strong enough to hold a rifle to take up arms in defense of the city. The stage was set for a bloody battle. The Sixth Army of the Wehrmacht began its assault on August 23, 1942. Not a step back. Despite heavy casualties, Stalin instructed his forces in the city to not retreat. Not a step back, he famously decreed in Order Number 227. Soviet soldiers who retreated without orders from their commanders would be put on trial and possibly executed. Let me just give you a disclaimer. They were definitely executed. Line 44. With fewer than 20,000 troops in the city and fewer than 100 tanks, Stalin's generals finally began sending reinforcements into the city and surrounding areas. Fighting raged in the streets of Stalingrad, and both sides stationed snipers on the roofs of the city's buildings. Germany augmented the Sixth Army's flanks with soldiers from its allies, Romania and Hungary. But from the north and south of the city, the Red Army launched a successful counterattack against these troops, famously known as Operation Uranus. It was organized by Soviet generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky. Despite heavy losses, the Red Army was able to surround the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. Soviet forces formed a defensive ring around the city by late November 1942, trapping the nearly 300,000 German and Axis troops inside. This effort became subject of a propaganda film that produced after the war, the Battle of Stalingrad. The German forces from Stalingrad slowly starved. The Red Army would take advantage of their weakness during the cold, harsh winter months ahead. Russian winter sets in. As Russia's brutal winter began, the Soviet generals knew the Germans would be fighting in conditions to which they were not accustomed. Soviets began clustering their positions around Stalingrad. They choked off the German forces from food and ammunition, surrounding them in even tighter and in an ever-tightening noose. The Axis forces, mostly Germans and Italians, were stretched thin, allowing the Red Army, to break through the west of the city. At this point, the German generals abandoned all efforts to rescue their beleaguered forces trapped in Stalingrad. Still, Hitler refused to surrender even as his men slowly starved and ran out of ammunition. Victory for the Soviet Union. By February of 1943, Soviet troops had retaken Stalingrad and captured nearly 100,000 German soldiers. Most of the captured soldiers died in Soviet prison camps, either as a result of disease or starvation. The loss of Stalingrad was the first wartime failure Hitler publicly acknowledged. It put Hitler and the Axis powers on the defensive and boosted Soviet confidence as it continued to do battle on the Eastern Front. In the end, many historians believe the Battle of Stalingrad marked a major turning point in conflict. It was the beginning of the march toward victory for the Allied forces of the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and the United States. In February 2018, Russian citizens gathered in the city, now called Volgograd, to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the end of the battle that had nearly destroyed their city. Question 7. Read the following paragraph from the introduction. The Battle of Stalingrad was a brutal military campaign between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and its Axis allies during World War II. The battle was one of the largest, longest, and bloodiest engagements in modern warfare. Which answer choice best supports the idea that the Battle of Stalingrad was a brutal military campaign? A. Firmly understanding Hitler's plans, the Soviet Union had already shipped much of the stores of grain and cattle out of Stalingrad. However, the city's 400,000 residents were not evacuated. The Soviet leadership believed their presence would inspire troops. B. The number of civilian casualties is unknown. However, it is believed that tens of thousands were killed and tens of thousands more were captured and forced into slave labor in camps in Germany. C. The loss at Stalingrad was the first wartime failure Hitler publicly acknowledged. It put Hitler and the Axis powers on the defensive and boosted Soviet confidence as it continued to do battle on the Eastern Front. D. In the end, many historians believe the Battle of Stalingrad marked a major turning point in the conflict. It was the beginning of the march toward victory for the Allied forces of the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and the United States. 8. Read the following sentences from the article. The Soviet... Oh, interesting. Don't worry about these check marks here, everybody. These will be gone too when you do it yourself. The important shipping route connected the western part of the Soviet Union with its distant eastern regions. Ultimately, Hitler wanted the Wehrmacht to occupy Stalingrad because of its value of propaganda purposes, given that it bore Stalin's name. Hitler proclaimed that upon taking Stalingrad, all of the city's male residents would be killed and its women deported. At first, Soviet forces slowed the Wehrmacht's advances during the series of brutal skirmishes just north of Stalingrad. Which two sentences taken together provide the best evidence to support the idea that winning Stalingrad would have been strategically important to the German army? A, 1 and 2, B, 1 and 4, C, 2 and 3, or D, 3 and 4. So these numbers will be here when you guys do it, okay? It's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Hint, eliminate the most wrong answers. Remember, as we went through our multiple choice skill building, we taught you always eliminate the two most wrong answers, giving you the two most correct answers and a much better chance of getting the answer right. Multiple choice strategy. Determine what the question is asking you. Ask yourself what can be eliminated by underlining your evidence in the text, and make sure you always choose the best of the last two possible answer choices. Here you have some examples of metaphors. Time, you thief. Life is a journey. Less is more is one of my favorite. Love is a jewel. So question 9, read the following selection from the section The Russian Winter Sets In. The Soviets began clustering their positions around Stalingrad. They choked off the German forces from food and ammunition, surrounding them in an ever-tightening noose. How does the metaphor help the reader to understand the position of the Soviet-German forces? Remember, a metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable, like that article was fire. A. It helps to demonstrate that the Germans were in a precarious position and could lose their hold on the Soviets at any point. B. It helps to demonstrate how the Soviets cutting off the supplies made the situation even more difficult for the Germans. C. It indicates that the Germans forced the Soviets to choose a strategy that would eventually get them tied up in a skirmish. D. It indicates that the Soviets were unsure how much longer they could withstand the pressure from the German forces. Question 10. Read the following sentence from the section Not a Step Back. Germany augmented the Sixth Army's flanks with soldiers from its allies, Romania and Hungary. But from the north and south of the city, the Red Army launched a successful counterattack against these troops, famously known as the Operation Uranus. It was organized by Soviet generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky. The author used the words augmented to mean frustrated, abated, vanquished, or reinforced. And down here, guys, you have the definitions of those words. Frustrated is feeling or expressing distress and annoyance, especially because of an inability to change or achieve something. Abated, lessen, reduce, or remove. Vanquished, defeat thoroughly. Reinforced is to strengthen or support an object or substance, especially with additional material. Question 11. Directions. Write a paragraph that explains the central idea of that article we just read. Use at least 2 details from the article to support your response. You must use at least 2 subordinator words in your response. So your response must contain although, even though, since, because, contrast, after, before, or at least 2 of those. You're going to type your response here. All right. And that marks the end, page 63 of the packet. Like I said, those little mistakes I found, like up here, will be fixed by the time you guys see it, so don't worry. And good luck, all right? Make sure you email us. If you have any questions, make sure you ask those questions during our Zoom meetings we have twice a week, or ask those questions during the 2 group phone calls we make to you. There's no excuse at this point for you guys not doing the work because we're giving you lots of additional support. So if you have questions, make sure you ask us, all right? Good luck.